Before we get going with episode 67, a word from our friends at Monmouth Park. Racing returns to beautiful Monmouth Park on Friday, May the 28th. That's this coming Friday. The 2021 season features some new faces in the trainer colony as well as some new post times. Every Friday, first post will be at 5 p.m. Eastern. Saturday and Sunday cards will begin at 12:15 Eastern, kicking off the 50-cent Win Early Pick 5. Home to six-figure pools and 15% takeout. For those at the Jersey Shore, we are happy to welcome fans back to enjoy the races on site. It all starts this Friday, May 28th. It is the return of live racing to beautiful Monmouth Park. Now, on to episode 67. What's happening? Welcome into the Matt Bernier Show, part of the In the Money Media Network. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Today is Monday, May the 24th, 2021. This is episode 67 of the show. However you listen, thank you for doing so. You can find the podcast in a million different places. If you are someone who just listens to the audio versions, you have Apple Podcasts, you have SoundCloud, Spotify, InTheMoneyPodcast.com, you name it. Basically, anywhere you download or listen to your podcast, you can find the show. If you follow along over on YouTube, all you need to do, search bar Matt Bernier Show. You'll get this episode along with the 66 prior. And if you're over there, make sure you subscribe and you make sure the bell icon's lit up. That way you get notified anytime new content is uploaded to the In the Money Media channel, whether it's this, whether it's the Players Podcast, whether it's Horseplayer Happy Hour, whether it's Nick Tamro's Daily Plays from Belmont Park. There's a million things going on over there, but you need to make sure you get those bell icon lit up there so you can get the notifications that let you know that there's new stuff uploaded. And as always, with all of those places, please rate, review, and subscribe. This week's show, we're going to look a little bit ahead. I feel like this is the first week where we genuinely can kind of take a break, or take a breath anyway, but also keeping an eye on what to look forward to next Saturday, not this coming Saturday, the following Saturday, that being the Belmont Stakes, the third and final leg of the U.S. Triple Crown. And I know I had done this way back when I was still with the racing form and doing the show over there. But kind of, I wanted to dissect a little bit of what does a Belmont Stakes winner look like? And I'm only going to go back through till 2011. But the idea is going to be to take a look at some past performances of the winners of the Belmont Stakes for each of those years and try to draw some conclusions on what you're looking for, what kind of form these horses had coming into the Belmont Stakes, what kind of running style they have, trainers, breeding, the whole nine. So it won't be a super intensive piece, but it's going to be just basically going through and assessing what they all look like going into it. And maybe we can try to use that to our advantage here coming up next Saturday in the Belmont Stakes. We'll also dive into some listener and viewer questions. Some folks have sent some things over via email, bernier.matt89@gmail.com. We'll dive into a few of those as well to wrap things up. So that's what this week's show looks like. Next week, still TBD what we're going to be doing there, but that's what all eyes are going to be looking forward anyway, toward the Belmont. But it's nice that we don't have that fevered pitch where we can kind of just take a little bit of a breath and maybe I don't want to say more prepared, but I think this is a race compared to the Preakness. And granted, Ron Bauer was the winner, and another double-digit odds type that got the job done. This is a race where we have some time, and we can go back and say, all right, what does it take to win a race like the Belmont Stakes at 1.5 miles, mind you? I will not be talking about 'Tis the Law, simply because a one-turn 1.125 could not be farther from what we're going to be talking about and dealing with next Saturday at Belmont Park. So that's what is on deck this week. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, as always, beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at some of these horses, their past performances, and the routes they took to get to the Belmont Stakes and ultimately win the third and final leg of the Triple Crown. What does a Belmont Stakes winner look like? That's what this is going to be all about, this little exercise. I'm only going to be concerned with the 3-year-old campaigns. Not what they did as 2-year-olds, and certainly not what they do after the Belmont. But what do these horses look like headed into the Belmont Stakes, and then how did they win the Belmont itself? not talking about 'tis the law because the 1-turn mile and an eighth does not apply here. And, do with this what you will. I'm sure some folks will look at it and say, oh, you're glossing over important pieces or you're not making a large enough deal of others. That's up to you. I'm not sitting here trying to tell you, you have to look at this sort of thing. I'm showing you what it is what it is. What you see is what you get, or what you hear is what you get, and how I approach the Belmont, which is my favorite of the Triple Crown. It's my favorite race of the year, just because I think from a tactical standpoint, there's so much more that goes into it as opposed to some of these other races that we see throughout the year that are, not, I don't want to say that they're more publicized, but, the Belmont feels like it has sort of been lost in the shuffle because it is, some people will call it a dinosaur, that we just, it's not a sexy race. It's not one that, it's all about the flash and the winning, just setting land speed records. It's a much more controlled tempo. There are more decisions that need to be made throughout the course of the run. And for whatever reason, I find that extremely appealing. Maybe because we don't see it very often. It's also probably why I love long distance grass racing. Keep your sprints. Turf or dirt. I would much rather watch long distance dirt and turf racing. But another story for another day. Sir Winston, for Mark Casse, awesome again out of an Afleet Alex mare. Really didn't do a heck of a lot before he got to Belmont Park. This is in 2019. He started off in the Withers in February at Aqueduct, earned an 88 buyer, finishing 4th. In March, he went to Oldsmar, Florida in the Tampa Bay Derby. He finished 5th, earned a buyer of 86. Then he went to Keeneland. In the Grade 2 Bluegrass, he finished 7th in a field of 14 and earned a 65 buyer. At this point, I would have been floored if you said you were looking at a classic winner in the United States. But just about 2 months later, that's exactly what you have. In May, he runs in the Peter Pan. Keep in mind, a 1-turn mile and an eighth, but he came from out of the clouds and ran really well that day. My concern with him going into the Belmont was not the fact that he wasn't fast enough, because that 100 buyer he earned in the Peter Pan made him a legitimate threat. It was just the way in which he won it. Or earned it, I should say, because he finished 2nd in the Peter Pan. Deep closers don't typically win Belmont Stakes. They just don't. Mile and a half races, speed is even more imperative. We talk about it with the 1 1/4 Derby or any of these other races out at the 10 furlong-ish distance. It's even more important out at a 1.5 miles, going 12 furlongs. I think the reason the Belmont is different is as far as Sir Winston was concerned, it's because of the ride Joel Rosario gave him. I feel like he put him into position early enough that I can't sit there and say he was a deep closer. He was 6 or 7 lengths off of it early on, but Rosario got him into the position he needed to be in when the real running began. So let's say, and maybe that's the way I need to rephrase or rethink the way that I go about looking at Belmont Stakes contenders. Can you be within a length and a half, let's say, length and a half or 2 lengths of the lead with a half mile to go? Because if you can't be that close, I don't really think you have a great chance of winning. Now, you can certainly run 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, but to be viewed as a legitimate win threat, I think you need to be within, I'm even reluctant to say 2 lengths. A length and a half to 2 lengths max would be my opinion. But you know what? We're going to continue to go through these charts, and maybe I'll be proven or disproven. Let me know what you think. When you go through the Belmont Stakes or handicapping the Belmont, what are you looking for? What is it specifically that you have your eye on when you're looking for a Belmont Stakes horse? Let me know beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. I think Rosario got Sir Winston into the position he needed to be in. I think he had a beautiful ride, and if I am remembering correctly, he was on a very, very kind rail that day at Belmont Park. He went on to victory, won by a length, earned a 95 buyer. Sir Winston is never going to be remembered as an all-time great Belmont Stakes winner, but he is a Belmont Stakes winner. Nobody can take that away from him. I thought he got a beautiful ride. I don't know that the running style is one that you necessarily want to be keying in on, unless you're going to get a ride like he did from Rosario that day. But to each their own. For me, I'm always going to be a little bit leery with those types at a 1.5 miles. Let's go to 2018. This is Justify for Baffert. one of two in here for Baffert. We're going to talk about American Pharoah in a little bit. There's really not a lot to say here. He was unbeaten. He won the Triple Crown, but you'll note the highlighted piece there if you're watching on YouTube or if you're just listening. He won in gate-to-wire fashion, which you're going to hear a few times here talking about Belmont Stakes winners. The pedigree, Scat Daddy out of a Ghost Sapper mare, he'd already shown his brilliance. The key for me with this horse, because outside of his Santa Anita Derby, he didn't blow your socks off as far as speed figures were concerned, but he was forwardly placed. He was able to go, and he was able to go pretty fast when he was forward. I don't have a heck of a lot to add about Justify. What you see is what you get. He won the race in gate-to-wire fashion. He set legitimate fractions for 1.5 miles anyway, 48 for a half, going 12 furlongs. We're not walking out there. But keep in mind, you're going to be dealing with a more moderate tempo in a race like the Belmont, just by default, because they're going that far. So when we talk about speed, or when you think of speed, don't think of it from the standpoint of, genuinely, it's more of a marathon than a sprint. You wouldn't expect to see the Boston Marathon or the London Marathon or any of these marathons where you get somebody that just goes out there breakneck early on and they're the one who ends up winning the whole thing. It's people that can go fast but can also last that long. And fast, relatively speaking, a sprinter is always going to outfoot a fast marathon runner. A horse who can go to the front at 1 mile or 1.1 miles is always going to be faster than horses that are capable of doing so at 1.5 miles, but they're not going to have anything left in the tank compared to these horses who can go what I'm going to consider honest or fast at 1.5 miles. A horse like Justify, who can go to the front in 48 and still have plenty left in the tank when the real running begins. Move on to 2017. This is when things get a little bit more interesting. This is one of Todd Pletcher's winners, Tapwrld. Now, Tapit has been a very successful sire as far as Belmont Stakes runners are concerned, but he's another one who his form was certainly better, I would say, than Sir Winston's, but far from something that, the records are going to be, or the record books are going to be looking back on saying, oh, what an animal. First start of the year was in the Sam F. Davis. You'll note that out of the 3 that we've discussed, including Tapwrld thus far, 2 of them have gone through Oldsmar, Florida. You're going to hear that again at some point. I don't know if it's a peculiarity or if there's something to that. But point being, Sam F. Davis, he runs second, solid enough effort, earns a 93 buyer. That was in February. It's a pretty good number for that time in the year. I think everybody had to be looking at it thinking we've got a big chance for a race like the Derby. Comes back in the Tampa Bay Derby, wins that going away, could not look more impressive. Really a lot to like there, 96 buyer, trending the right direction. Takes on better horses on, I believe if my memory serves correct, a racetrack at Keeneland that was very kind to speed that day in the Bluegrass. He's coming from way out of it. He finishes 5th, earns a 76 buyer, takes a little bit of the shine off into the Kentucky Derby, where he finishes 6th and earns an 88 buyer. Then on to the Belmont Stakes. And many people had pegged this race for him because of his running style, and it felt like he would run all day. You'll note where he's positioned throughout the run. 1.5 lengths, 2 lengths, 1.5 lengths, a length off of it. He wins by 2 and earns a career best 103 buyer speed figure. Tapwrld is the kind of horse that I think you can look at and say, you had reasons to believe there was something there. He could potentially be a little bit closer to the pace if need be, and he was going to be able to finish. I think he's an interesting horse to keep an eye on and looking for that sort of profile. When we're talking about this year's Belmont Stakes, who are the kind of horses who maybe they're not confirmed lead types, but they can, with the stretch out in distance, be a little bit closer, and you think they're going to have the bottom, the ability to finish going 12 furlongs. Horse like Tapwrld, maybe he's one that you want to consider as far as a bigger picture, as maybe a template of what to look for going forward. The year prior, in 2016, Creator. Now again, Creator to me is more cut from the same cloth as a Sir Winston, but he does have a little bit of Tapwrld in him in that Sir Winston hadn't run the really fast race with the exception of the Peter Pan. Both Tapwrld and Creator had run fast races well before the Belmont. You see Creator, he kind of got off to an even slower start, really. He ran in 2 maiden special weight races early on, one at the Fairgrounds, one at Oaklawn, broke his maiden at Oaklawn, earned an 80 buyer. Comes back in the Rebel in March, finishes third with a 90, comes back in the Arkansas Derby in the middle of April. He wins that race. Again, with a closing running style, 96 buyer though, he's run fast. Shows up in the Kentucky Derby, not the cleanest of trips, finishes 13th, 76 buyer. Another example of a horse that you just probably draw a line through the Kentucky Derby. If you do that, the Belmont Stakes winning that race with a 99 buyer doesn't look nearly as implausible. But the running style, he was just never one that I was going to be really all that interested in because, as I've alluded to, I don't think that's a running style that typically produces or yields success. Having said that, though, I continue to go back to this sort of point of call right here, which I believe at 1.5 miles, I can look at it real quick. I believe at 1.5 miles is right around a half mile to go. He's third. So another horse who, yes, early on, coming from much farther off of it, but Rad Ortiz Jr. gets him into shouting distance anyway. He still would not be, I wouldn't be looking at that saying that's the style that I want in my choice for a race like the Belmont, but at least you can always look back at this horse and say, see, somebody did come from out of the clouds. I would argue that he got put into position when he needed to be, as opposed to actually being the horse coming from 100 out of it, but neither here nor there. Maybe it's just semantics. Another son of Tapwrld who went on to win the Belmont Stakes. Move on to 2015 with American Pharoah. Very similar to Justify. I really don't have a heck of a lot to add here. He was able to get out there and clear to the front, going 48-4, which again at 1.5 miles is a reasonable fraction. But he went gate to wire, and he won as impressively as probably any Belmont Stakes winner we've seen in recent memory. Speed figure wise, he's not really one to be basing anything off of simply because he was American Pharoah. What else do you need to know? First Triple Crown winner in 37 years. Let's move on to 2014 now, because I think Tonalist is another interesting case. Tonalist was a horse who had shown ability really from the start. You go back to the beginning or the middle of January, he breaks his maiden at Gulfstream Park, earns a 90 buyer speed figure, takes on winners for the first time in February, finishes second, earns a 92, and is then put away until we get back to Belmont Park. He runs in the Peter Pan in May, wins going away, earns a 104 buyer. He deserved to be considered one of the main contenders, and keep in mind, he was 9-1 into the teeth of California Chrome, who was going for the Triple Crown. And he wins the race with a 100 buyer, and he does so a length off, essentially, for all intents and purposes, throughout the entire race. He's only a length off the pace. To me, this is the prototypical running style is this right here. I want to be about a length and a half at most. I want to have a horse that I think can finish. And I want to have a horse who, it's not a prerequisite that you need to have already run fast. But it at least makes you feel a little bit more confident that, okay, I have a horse who can be positioned where he needs to be. I think can finish the race off, whether it be pedigree, trainer, combination of the two, along with the rider. And he's already got a couple of fast numbers to his name. Tonalist made plenty of sense, and he was already proven at Belmont Park, which is something that shouldn't totally go overlooked. I think another thing that shouldn't go overlooked is who is riding. How many of these riders have experience at Belmont Park? Belmont is genuinely a horse of a different color, just because of how large it is. And you need to time your moves correctly. You move a little too early, you can feel the effects of it. You might still have 1/8 of a mile to go. And you moved a little bit too soon, and that's that. Tonalist, though, I like the running style. I like everything about horses that project this way and have this sort of look to them. I could see a horse, I don't want to say... Essential Quality is probably not a good example of that this year, because I think in his heart of hearts, he probably wants to come from a little bit farther back, probably 2 or 3 lengths off of it. But that doesn't preclude him from running well in a race like the Belmont. He has already run fast, which is positive. Never run at Belmont Park before, but something to keep in mind. As we went on 2013, Malice. Another Todd Pletcher trainee. This is a horse who, again, we take a look at the overall body of work. A little bit of a, I don't want to call him a late bloomer, but it took him a little while to really put things together. First start of the year, N1X at Gulfstream, finishes second, 89 Beyer. Then they sent him to the fairgrounds to run in the 2 graded stakes races to wrap up their path to the Kentucky Derby, the Risen Star and the Louisiana Derby. The Risen Star, he finishes third, earns a 92 Beyer. The Louisiana Derby, 7th with an 80 Beyer. He then runs in the Bluegrass, loses by a neck to Java's War. Earns an 89 Beyer. Kentucky Derby, the equipment change happens. They put the blinkers on him, and he just streaks off there and runs, just sets a wicked pace. Pays the price, finishes 12th, but from a speed figure standpoint, actually isn't embarrassed with an 84 Beyer. The blinkers come back off. We stretch out in distance from the 1.25 miles to a 1.5 miles. He starts a couple lengths off of it, but then moves to the lead beneath Mike Smith. And then he goes on and opens up down the lane, wins by more than 3 lengths and earns a 98 Beyer, which at the point was a career best. Another horse who is forward, has a little bit of tactical speed. No, he hadn't run overly fast just yet, but you take a look at the pedigree, curling out of a Royal Anthem mare, you'd think he'd run all day. He's trained by Pletcher. Pletcher knows how to win a race like this. There are many things that pointed to Malice, yet I completely missed them. I was still a young pup in the game back then. I totally missed it, but now with, let's say 8 years under my belt from this point, you look at it and go, it's obvious. And somehow he paid, $28. He made a lot of sense for a race like the Belmont Stakes. You go to 2012, Union Rags, trained by Michael Matz. This is a horse who, again, I'm ignoring the 2-year-old form, but all of you know what he was as a 2-year-old. Exceptional talent as a 2-year-old. First start of the year, Gulfstream Park, late February, wins the Fountain of Youth going away, 95 Beyer. So he's already run fast. Comes back in the Florida Derby, defeated at odds of 2-5, finishes third, 93 Beyer. Kentucky Derby, he has a trip, 7th, 90 Beyer speed figure. But then we go to the Belmont, and you can see it's highlighted again. He's a few, 3-4 lengths off of it early on, but the key point of the run, we're already up into it. Johnny V gets him going. We're only a length off of it now, just in behind Painter. And it turns into a war of attrition. To keep in mind, he only won by a neck, defeating Painter. Painter, what did he do? He went right to the front. So you're talking about 2 horses that like to be forwardly placed. They run 1-2. And they're a length and 3/4 ahead of Adigan, who runs third. Just continuing to feed into that narrative of horses who you think can get the distance. Horses who have run reasonably fast in the past. Not a prerequisite, but it certainly helps. Local rider, John Velasquez, knows when to make his move. He's not going to move too early. You don't have to worry about that with Johnny V. Ridden Belmont Park a million times. But the idea of being in the position you need to be in order to really have a chance of succeeding. Union Rags, another one. And the last one we'll talk about is Ruler on Ice, who is probably the most peculiar of them all in that his form leading into it was very mediocre. Started his year on the inner at Aqueduct, finished second, earned a Beyer of 77, moved to Parks a few weeks later. In an N1X, he wins that with an 81 Beyer. They then send him out to Sunland Park for the Sunland Derby. He finishes third, earns an 86, comes back to the East Coast and runs at Pimlico in the Federico Tessio, runs second with an 83 Beyer. Now, there are a few things that change with Ruler on Ice before the Belmont, and do with this what you will, and maybe this is why he's a bit of an anomaly. He had run really well on wet tracks in the past. He had a win and a second by 3 lengths, 3/4 of a length. So the sloppy sealed nature of Belmont Park for the Belmont Stakes in 2011 worked to his advantage. He was also wearing blinkers for the first time. So, there were other things going on that could have potentially helped identify this horse as having a legitimate chance. The big thing for me, though, you take a look, for those of you that are watching, you see where he had been running in his races prior, and then you see where he's running with the blinkers on for the first time in the Belmont Stakes. He's a length and a half off of it, a length off of it. And then he goes on, takes the lead by a little bit, and ultimately prevails by 3/4 of a length. You don't have to have the most amazing form entering the Belmont to win it. It's nice, and I think it maybe makes you believe a little bit more if you have run fast in the past, but you don't have to have run the big number leading into the Belmont to win or be a win contender, and likely at a better price. I do think you need to have the ability to be in position when you need to be. You can't be trying to make your move with a 1/4 mile to go in the Belmont Stakes. I don't believe that. Unless it turned into a complete pace meltdown, and I cannot remember the last pace meltdown in the Belmont. Maybe it'll happen this year. Who knows? Anything can happen. But I think you need to have that sort of tactical ability to be in striking range at the appropriate time. You can't be trying to do too much too late. You need to be put in position to succeed. And the Belmont is just, I said it before, I'll say it again. It's a horse of a different color. I think having a local jock may go a pretty significant way where they're not going to push the button too early. I think it's something you want to factor in when you're looking at some of these contenders. I think you also want to look at the pedigree. Do you have any reason to believe, or based on what you've seen visually, some of these horses that you see the pedigree and you say, there's no way they're going to get a 1.5 miles. Well, how do they look on the track? Do they look like they're really extending? They're still reaching out. They're finishing with some energy at 1 1/8 or 1 1/4 that you think will translate out to a 1.5 miles. You never know until they do it. But I mean, that's handicapping. You're trying to project. Has the trainer had success with this sort of move in the past? Are we dealing with a Todd Pletcher? Are we dealing with someone who this is the first time they're doing this sort of thing? I think all of these need to be taken into consideration when you're looking at horses that could possibly win a race like the Belmont Stakes. It's my favorite race of the year. I'm so looking forward to it. Let me know, what do you look for in a Belmont Stakes contender? What is it that gets you onto a horse? Whether you're right or wrong, what are you looking for in a Belmont Stakes horse that you want to pick and you want to bet? Beneath the video player on YouTube or on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. All right, let's get some viewer Q&A. These are some emails I've received over the past week or two from many different folks from all over the place. If you want to send an email as opposed to leave a comment beneath the video player or over on Twitter, feel free to email me, bernier.matt89@gmail.com. We'll start off with an email from Ben Greenbaum. Matt, I'm Ben, 70-year-old horse racing lover in Little Rock, Arkansas. I just wanted to give you my analysis of the Preakness, which I came to before watching episode 66 just now. That was last week's show. Not trying to disagree with you because you pretty obviously have more cred on the subject than I. Not true. Not true. Don't say that, Ben. I thought the pace played a big role I thought the pace played a big role in the second and third place finishers getting beat. 110 and change for 6 furlongs and 134 and change for the mile seemed pretty taxing to me. You even pointed out Jackie's Warriors race on Derby Day, which he won in 134 and change. I also think Medina Spirit had to have something taken out of him in the long stretch battle in the Derby, as evidenced by the second, third, and fourth place finishers passing on the Preakness. Anyway, I discovered your show on YouTube about a month ago. Love it, and I'll be a devoted... Let me try it again. I promise you guys, I can read. Anyway, I discovered your show on YouTube about a month ago. Love it, and I'll be a devoted watcher weekly. Ben Greenbaum. Ben, thank you for coming along. Thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. You know what? I'm willing to acknowledge that my opinion of the race and being as disappointed in Medina Spirit's effort as I was, and I still am, I may be looking at it the wrong way. And maybe it was the pace situation that really compromised both he and Midnight Bourbon. I guess my bigger piece was I felt like using that but that logic was kind of by default devaluing the performance from Rombauer. And I thought he ran such an exceptional race that, and given the way Medina Spirit ran in the Kentucky Derby, I was just disappointed that he backed up as badly as he did. To your point, though, the second, third, and fourth place finishers from the Derby, they all bypassed it. To be honest, I think a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that if you don't have to run 2 weeks later, and when I say have to, no one has to do anything. But when you have the Derby winner, you almost feel obligated to run back 2 weeks later in Baltimore. I think had any of the other three won the Derby, let's put it this way, I think they would have been back in the Preakness. But we just don't typically run horses back that quickly. So perhaps the way you've laid it out, Ben, is entirely accurate, that Medina Spirit had so much taken out of him fighting on as tenaciously as he did down the lane in Louisville that it just sapped some of that energy out of him in Baltimore. I'm willing to acknowledge that, certainly. I still expected more given the way the track was playing and given the way we had seen him fight in the past. And coupling that with the idea, again, that to me, from a pace standpoint, if we're saying it compromised the second and third place finishers in a way that's sort of devaluing Rombauer's performance and suggesting that, well, maybe if they hadn't gone that fast early on, maybe Rombauer's not good enough to go by them. And I know I'm not trying to put words in other people's mouths, but that's just, I'm thinking sort of outside the box a little bit about, if A then B, if X then Y, that sort of thing. So, but look, I'm always willing to acknowledge that my opinion and assessment of races and things like that could absolutely be wrong. And the thing about it, for anyone who has differing opinions or whatever it may be, we won't know until they come back and run at least once, if not twice, 3, 4, 5, 10 more times, hopefully, to either kind of confirm or deny the opinions that or the conclusions that we've come to coming out of these events. So, Ben, thank you for the email. Thank you for the support. On to the next. Question from Peter Yoakum. Hi, Matt. A question that I think would be an interesting topic for your podcast. I understand why racing officials have been reluctant to space the Triple Crown races out further on the calendar, with tradition being a key part of their identity. But racing thrives off of big weekends, and as a Maryland area racing fan, it strikes me that there is real value in improving the undercards in particular if these Triple Crown weekends were spaced out a little further. Tradition is one thing, but it doesn't feel like a big race weekend without a Grade 1 turf race or a Grade 1 3-year-old fillies race. In fact, the Preakness is the only Grade 1 at Pimlico, and the card is often heavily watered down, while Derby Oaks weekend has 6 Grade 1s and Belmont has 8. What are your thoughts on the chances that racing officials consider a more innovative approach? What would you favor? He also says in parentheses, for what it's worth, I think the Maryland Jockey Club officials put on a competitive card this year, despite the lack of star power. Thanks for considering, Peter Yoakum. Peter, thank you for listening and watching. Thank you for the question as well. Pimlico, well, let's just say the Maryland Jockey Club, but Pimlico, because Pimlico runs just such a short meet, and it's specifically for the Preakness. You're in a really tough position, to your point, Peter, because of where you are spaced on the calendar. My thought with Baltimore in general, I don't think there's enough meat on the bone to have 2 days, like Louisville and Churchill does for Oaks Day and Derby Day. I think you should consolidate, very similar to the way that Belmont Park has, where they have just their stacked Saturday. Yeah, they've got some stakes races in the days leading up to it, but guess what? They can do that a little bit more than Pimlico can, just again, for the reasons that we're talking about. So I would combine the Friday and Saturday cards, where you have all of your your marquee events, your Black Eyed Susan, your Pimlico Special, anything else that was run on Friday. All of that is on Saturday. I also think you need to get a little bit because you're in such a precarious position, because you're whether we like it or not, they're not going to change the spacing of things anytime soon. I don't believe anyway. And frankly, I don't really know that it would make a great deal of difference, because let's say you moved it after the Belmont, because Belmont's not going to give up their time. They like their spacing from the Kentucky Derby. You're going to get many of those same horses that ran on the Derby undercard. They're going to be looking at races at Belmont Park, so they're not going to move. So if you're Pimlico, unfortunately, you're probably going to lose out on any of those horses, unless you moved later on in the year, which at that case, you're probably looking at Laurel as opposed to Pimlico, which goes into a whole other set of things that I'm not smart enough to know about. But then you're running into the Saratogas of the world and the Monmouths of the world when their meet is kicking off, and Del Mar out west and all sorts of different things. So it's a really difficult position to be in. Having said that, I think if you think a little bit more outside the box and try to cater to some of the divisions that maybe are neglected early on in the year, and maybe offer some bonuses. And this is something I think I don't even know technically what they go by anymore. Is it First Racing or the Stronach Group? You get who I'm getting at. I've seen other people bring it up before, and I think it's a great idea. I've thought about it as well. The idea that if you put together some sort of an incentive program for horses running in some of these other races, and say if you win this race and this race, you're running for this bonus. So I'm just making it up. Let's say you consolidated the Friday and Saturdays at Pimlico on Preakness weekend, all to just the Saturday program. And you know what? The other thing too, keep it to 12 races. You don't need to go 14 deep. Heck, have it be stakes races from start to finish. Forget about the maidens, forget about the allowance types, whatever it may be. But do something like that. So I'm just spitballing here. And again, I am not a racing secretary. I'm not an executive. I don't know how difficult or how feasible this is or isn't. But I'm just spitballing because that's what the podcast is all about. I would look at it and say, we have the Santa Anita Handicap in March, a race which many people have said, and rightfully so, over the past few years, it has it's been a little lackluster. It's not what it used to be. The big cap is no longer the granddaddy of them all kind of thing. And a lot of that has to do with where it's spaced on the calendar, where you've got other options for a lot more money. Dubai, Pegasus World Cup, X, Y, and Z, but specifically Dubai and Saudi Arabia. I think you put together some sort of a program where you offer incentives for running in multiple legs, but specifically running in the Pimlico Special. And when I say multiple legs, the 3 races I'm thinking of, the Pegasus World Cup, the Santa Anita Handicap, the Pimlico Special. So those are your older horses at longer distances, 1.125 miles, 1.25 miles, 1 3/16 miles. It's got a nice little flow to it. You run in 2 of the 3 legs, but you have to run in the Pimlico Special. So you can run in the Pegasus in the Pimlico. You can run in the Big Cap in the Pimlico. I call it the Pimlico, the Special. I don't know what kind of incentive, how much money you can offer. Or maybe it's something along the lines of we pay your entry fee, or whatever it is. You give them some sort of an incentive. We've seen the Stronach Group or First Racing be proactive with those sort of things and be innovative. The winner of the El Camino Real Derby at Golden Gate gets all expenses paid berth into the Preakness. If you do something like that and take it another step, offer an even bigger incentive, whatever the money number ends up being, to run in all 3 of those. To run in all 3 of them, you get some sort of a kicker. If you win, I'm making it up, 2 out of the 3, you get X bonus. If you win all 3 of them, you sweep it and give it some catchy name. The Stronach Series or whatever, I don't know. I don't even know, maybe they've had a Stronach Series before. But something along those lines to incentivize connections to keep their horses here. And I'm specifically right now talking about the older males for the most part, but we'll talk about some of the other ones in a minute here. You got to give them some reason to stay and run in these races. Because otherwise, just based on your timing, you're kind of in a tough spot. You just are. So that's one thought. Consolidate the Friday and Saturday. Offer the older horses, sort of the classic division types, some incentive to run in as many of the Stronach or First Racing races as possible to dissuade from going to Dubai, dissuade from going to Saudi Arabia. I get it. You're probably not going to be able to really fully do it considering the gobs of money that are available. But there's also the flip side of that where, hey, if I don't have to ship to the Middle East with my horse and perhaps take them out of training for a little while on the comeback and all that other stuff, maybe it's interesting. And hopefully that can kind of revitalize races like the Pimlico Special and the Big Cap. And even the Pegasus World Cup, for being honest. Now, so those are a few things. I also think an interesting idea, and I know I'm looking at the chart from Preakness Day. I suppose the dinner party sort of serves this group of horses, The race is contested at a mile and a 16th. I would like to see that race cut to a mile and bump the purse. This was a $250,000 race. I also think you could probably sort of rejigger some of the purse structure to really pump up your big races. Where, no disrespect to, I don't know, let me just flip through here real quick. The James W. Murphy. It's a mile race on turf for 3-year-olds. It's $100,000. 2 weeks earlier, you've got a graded stakes race. It's at least $100,000, if not more, in the American turf for 3-year-olds. I would probably do away with the James W. Murphy. Take that $100,000 in purse money and reallocate it. Move it. Add it to something like the dinner party or what I'm suggesting, a mile turf race. And give those milers another spot where you don't have to go out to a mile and an eighth in the Turf Classic if you think that's a bit of a stretch. Timing-wise, you're roughly a month, maybe even call it what? Yeah, at least a month, if not 5 weeks after the Grade 1 at Keeneland. So if you want, you keep those horses rolling. That's the other piece, too, to keep in mind. The mile division, for the most part, on grass, there aren't a ton of options. You kind of got to get creative. If you've got a crack miler, you got to get creative with them a little bit until we're talking about Saratoga time. You've got a race like the 4-Star Dave or the Bernard Baruch. I think it's a mile and a 16th off the top of my head. But point is, your just flat mile trips, there aren't a ton of them. So if you incentivize that group of horses, pump that purse up for the dinner party, cut it to a flat mile, get that up to a $500,000 race from a $250,000 race. Do away with the James W. Murphy. Maybe the Skip It. It's a 6 furlong race for fillies and mares. It's $100,000. In all likelihood, many of your fillies from the Humana excuse me, it's not the Humana Distaff anymore. It's the Derby City Distaff on the Derby undercard. They're not coming back in 2 weeks to turn back from 7/8 to 6 furlongs. Take that $100,000, put it to that mile turf race. Really pump that one up. I could keep going, but you get the idea. Pump that race up. Pump up the Pimlico Special. Pump up the Black-Eyed Susan. The Black-Eyed Susan, I think, is always going to be an interesting race for the reason I wrote about it for NBCSportsEdge.com. The idea that it at least offers an opportunity for the connections of 3-year-old fillies to say, either A, we want a softer group than is likely to go in the Kentucky Oaks, or B, we're just, for whatever reason, I know it's only 2 weeks, but maybe we're just not ready. Maybe we're not ready for the Oaks. Maybe we're not ready for the first Friday in May, or in this year it was the last Friday in April. But we still have a good quality filly, and we want to give her a chance in a graded stakes race before we end up taking on the cream of the crop and we send her to Saratoga or wherever else. So I think the Black-Eyed Susan, you know what, I wouldn't touch that race. I think it's fine, other than move it to the condensed Saturday idea. But also, another idea, going back to sort of that incentivized idea, why couldn't you take and I wouldn't use the Pegasus World Cup turf because it's more for the mile and an eighth, mile and 3/16 types. Why couldn't you take a race, like put together a group of races? Something like the Pan Am down at Gulfstream, whatever the mile and a quarter or mile and a half races out in Southern California at Santa Anita, and at Pimlico put together a mile and a half race or a mile and 3/8 race on grass. And again, very similar to what I was talking about with the older males on dirt, give them some sort of little series to try to incentivize running in those races as frequently as possible. Derby Day, you don't have a long distance turf race. Belmont Day, you've got a mile and a quarter grass race. You don't have anything for those super long-winded types. Many of those horses end up running at Keeneland at a mile and a half. Why couldn't you dangle that carrot out there and say, this is where you actually want to come? And by the way, while you're at it, not only you want to come here, you might want to run in at least one of the other ones, if not both of them. I think those are the sort of things, if And I think those just would inherently make them better betting opportunities. They would make them more quality races. And that's just me, again, spitballing. I don't know how hard or even feasible any of this sort of stuff is. But to the point and to the question, those are some of the things that I would personally be looking at, saying, you know what, we can do some stuff here. We got to get creative. And, you know what, maybe tradition-wise, it's not what we're used to doing, but we're going to, we want to really kind of pump this up a little bit more instead of it just being the Preakness and then some other races. You could really make it, call it the Preakness Festival or the Pimlico Festival. Oh, I guess that's probably what their actual thing is called, but Preakness Festival. And top to bottom, you've got a 12-race card. You've got the Preakness. You've got the Pimlico Special that's juiced up, and it's got that little series, that trio of races together. Heck, if you want to go 4 deep, you even include the Hollywood Gold Cup coming up in June or July, one of the two. I mean, you really could get interesting there. You could get creative there. Create a juicy mile turf race for that group of horses who they do have a little bit of a lull. And make a long distance turf race. 1 3/8, 1.5 miles, something like that. And again, if you want to do something creative, give them some sort of a little division that they can run with. So, Peter, those are my thoughts. Again, and I readily admit, that is me not knowing the logistics and how the whole thing works. But sort of fantasy football, looking at things, why couldn't we do this, this, and this? So again, thank you for the question. Thank you for listening. On to the next. We'll wrap up this week's show with this question. Am I out of focus? Have I been out of focus? No. How about that? Well, even if I was out of focus, I apologize. We'll wrap up episode 67 with this question. This question comes from Blake Willison. Hey, Matt, my name is Blake, and I am a huge fan of your show, along with the rest of In the Money Media. Thank you. Appreciate that, Blake. I have a question, and it relates to breaking into the industry. I'm sure many of you listening are interested in a question like this, and I get this asked many, many times. I'm a recent college graduate with a business degree, but my dream would be to work in the racing industry. Being from a suburb of Detroit, there isn't a lot of opportunities nor a ton of enthusiasm from my family to pursue this field, and I have no experience in the field. What would be your advice to someone like myself who would like to pursue a career in the racing industry? Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best going forward, Blake Willison. Blake, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting and following along, not just this show, but everybody along over at In the Money Media. It's an interesting position to be in, especially someone who is young, who is a college graduate. You seemingly have, the world is your oyster. But I guess it depends what area of the industry you're interested in getting involved in. Now, you have to also understand, I don't know a horse's head from a horse's ass as far as, actual bits and pieces. So if you wanted to go and be a veterinarian, I couldn't even begin to tell you. I assume you have to go to school. Well, I know you have to go to school for that, but point being, I don't even know where to even suggest you start with that sort of thing. But if you're someone who wants to be involved in the bloodstock side of things, or if you're someone who wants to be involved in the management side of things at a racetrack or any of that kind of stuff, I think you can just basically go and cold call people, which, we all know cold calling, not always the most effective way of doing things, but you never know. Maybe you hear back, maybe you don't. If you're really ambitious, you could always just make a move to horse country. I have heard, I don't know many personally who have done it, but I've heard and seen some of the success stories of people who just pack up and move to Lexington, or pack up and move to Louisville, or pack up and move to anywhere where these farms are, Ocala down in Florida, or any of that kind of stuff. I've also heard horror stories about how it doesn't work out, but I suppose that's life. You take chances, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. If you're someone looking at it from trying to be a public handicapper or do on-air things or written pieces, and that's usually what I get people asking me about. I kind of say the same thing time and time again. First things first, when people ask, they're like, oh, how did it work for you? I go, to be fair, I I just got really, really lucky. And I know that sounds bad, but I was lightning in a bottle, my whole situation. So I don't know that we can really use much of my scenario as a sort of game plan to sort of try to follow. But I will say, having done some of these things before everything started for me and seeing other people go this path or this route, I think I think there's some credence to it. I would make yourself very well known in social media circles. Those of you who aren't on Twitter, look, Twitter is a cesspool. But I will say, and our industry has its pluses and minuses as well, but the horse racing just community, I guess is probably the best way to coin it, on Twitter is fascinating. People know people can hook you up with this person to get you an interview and talking to someone else. It's also a good way to get your face and name out there. And I think writing, whether it's in a blog form or Twitter posts, the beautiful thing about Twitter is it's real time. With a blog, yes, you could go through and update it constantly, where there's nothing wrong with that. I've done it before. Might do it again. Who knows? But at least with Twitter, it's real time. And if you can get some traction, some people who your opinion doesn't have to be right all the time. I think that's the other thing too, that a lot of people get kind of intimidated by. And look, I'm just as guilty as anyone. You get down in the dumps after you have a real crummy run for a bit. Shit happens. It's going to happen. But the bigger piece is, if you have sound logic behind why you're approaching things the way you are, you're going to get people that will look at it and say, okay, well, I may not agree with it, but I get the point. I get the idea. Same goes for any kind of videos that you may do. They don't have to be long form. They don't have to be anything, giant, crazy productions. It can be straight to the point. It can be quick. I've seen people out there do a number of different things on Twitter that I think are really, really sharp. And the only thing you can do is keep putting yourself out there. And again, so much of it will come down to, if your content is good and your presentation is good and the way you approach things is of sound logic, people are going to take notice. People also take notice when it's just some airhead who's just spouting off at the mouth and saying disrespectful things and this, that, and the other. Putting people down and, basic stuff. I'm not breaking any news here. I think that's the best thing you can do. And, look, there are many avenues, and I'm not just saying this, but In the Money Media has really sort of embraced the idea of, and I'm not necessarily speaking of myself, but, PTF, there have been so many people that have come out that have wanted to help and do things. And Pete has developed a platform that, some of these folks have been able to get content out there that maybe they wouldn't have had such an easy time getting it out there, at least to as many eyeballs as they can through something like In the Money Media. And In the Money is not the only place where that happens. There are many, many different avenues. But I think that, to me, is the most straightforward way from a content standpoint. Again, I don't really have a great deal of advice to offer for the other avenues of the industry because I'm just not very well versed in them. I wish I had a better answer for you or some better advice. But when it comes to this sort of thing, even if it's not the nuts and bolts handicapping, if it's pedigree analysis, if it's just straight up betting analysis, I know, I get it. I may not have the best bet structure. I never claimed to have the best bet structure. It is what it is. Some people are very good at it. Presenting it in a positive light and maybe showing people the light and trying to get them doing things the air quotes correct way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's another path that you can take. If you're someone who, the physicality of an animal, seeing a horse, really showing off what to look for, whether it's in the pre-race or sort of, when I say pre-race, whether it's in the paddock or it's in the pre-race warm-ups or any of that kind of stuff. Body language, all that jazz. If you're someone who's really astute at being able to identify things that can potentially be signs, for better or for worse, of performances coming from a horse, I think that's probably one of the, I don't want to say underexposed areas, but outside of, and probably because the best of the best, and I've said this before, the Maggie Wolfendales of the world, the Gabby Gaudets, the Acacia Courtneys, the people who are just astute, Michelle Yu, at seeing little nuanced things that I certainly don't have the eye to. I don't know what these folks are seeing. PTF is actually very good at it as well. That's not my bread and butter, but if you have that ability, that's valuable. And if you can start doing that and showing off to people, trying to create some sort of a tutorial, this is what to look for, I think that's valuable information. I guess my big point is, if you get yourself out there, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles, but if the content is good, the opinions are of sound logic. They don't always have to be right, but showing off what to look for, that more often than not, people can glean something from, I think that's the way to go. So Blake, I apologize if I was all over the map with your answer here, and to anybody else listening or watching. That's just my thoughts, my opinion of the situation. Anybody that has any advice for Blake or anyone else who has a similar question, leave those answers beneath the video player on YouTube. Keep that kind of community aspect of it going. So, and if you want your questions sort of acknowledged here on the show, perhaps next week or in the weeks coming up, email bernier.matt89@gmail.com. That is going to wrap up episode 67 of the program. However you listen to this thing, thank you for doing so. Many ways to find the show. Podcasts. You have Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, inthemoneypodcast.com, just to name a few. If you watch along on YouTube, search bar Matt Bernier Show. You get this episode along with the 66 prior. You want to follow me over on Twitter, @Bernier_Matt. I will be back next Monday. We will be talking Belmont Stakes and getting ready for the big weekend that is. I'm looking forward to it. I'm supposed to be doing a seminar at Mohegan Sun with my buddy Mike Butnansky. That'll be a fun time. Love always being able to work with Zach Montoya and everybody down there. So looking forward to that. I'll probably talk about that more next Monday. But questions, comments, concerns as usual beneath the video player or directly to me on Twitter. And when I say directly, I don't mean a direct message. Maybe I should be more specific about that. Just shoot me a note on Twitter, @Bernier_Matt, and I'll do my best to try to get back to you. This has been episode 67 of the show. Until next Monday, best of luck however you play, whatever you play, and wherever you play.